How crazy would it be if a physicist with decades-long ties to black classified projects on everything from consciousness and remote viewing to UFOs and exotic propulsion decided to publish an academic paper about the true identity of the UFO phenomenon? Well, that is exactly what Dr. Hal Puthoff did. In his paper, Ultraterrestrial Models, he casually lays out several possible explanations for the UFO phenomenon, and the hypothesis he seems especially fond of is the ultraterrestrial hypothesis, meaning we're not talking about aliens from some other star system, but entities that may originate from hidden higher dimensions, ancient advanced Earth civilizations, time travelers, or perhaps something even stranger. And as if that weren't juicy enough, here's what I think is most interesting of all. We know for a fact that Dr. Hal Puthoff knows more than he can legally say. So perhaps what we'll find in this paper is more than just mere speculation. I think that this paper could be a breadcrumb trail that leads to a secret that is too big, too classified for him to say out loud. Now, before we get into the read-through of this paper proper, I think it's worth a moment to just review who is Hal Puthoff, what makes him so fascinating, so compelling. So first, I would say he's one of the most credentialed and kind of enigmatic figures at the intersection of science, the paranormal, and these classified government programs. He's a physicist by training, he got his PhD from Stanford, and his career really began in hard science, researching lasers and quantum vacuum fluctuations at Stanford Research Institute, or SRI, where he also became the co-founder of the now famous Project Stargate, via which the CIA and several other intelligence agencies studied the efficacy of essentially psychic spying, remote viewing. And then from there, over the decades, Dr. Puthoff has been associated with an absolute alphabet soup of agencies, along with various big defense contractors on projects that really blur the lines between science fiction, science proper, and national security. Again, we're talking psychic espionage, exotic propulsion systems, and UFOs directly. For instance, we know now that he was involved in the OSAP and ATIP programs at the Pentagon, and he did a number of things in that program, including evaluate materials that may not be of human origin. For more on that whole story, there's a myriad of places to go, but I would recommend Skinwalkers at the Pentagon to start. But in general, Puthoff to me always comes off as this quiet, genius, highly connected individual who, I think beyond a shadow of a doubt, knows more than he can legally say. And I think that this paper on ultraterrestrials may be the closest he's ever come to outright saying what he really suspects is going on with the UFO phenomena, or at least gesturing toward it, at least, like I said before, laying some breadcrumbs down toward a secret that is just too big, too classified for him to say out loud. Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. It's been a minute or two since we've done a read-through, not because I haven't wanted to, and in fact, this is one I've been wanting to do for quite a while. This is a topic I've been wanting to riff on for quite a while. This paper in particular, because for reasons I'm sure that I'm going to pontificate about, maybe before this even, Hal Puthoff is such a remarkably fascinating character in not just the phenomena, UFO space, but far beyond when it comes to consciousness, when it comes to so many different things. But without further ado, let's dive into what I think is a curious paper by Dr. Puthoff, Ultraterrestrial Models. Okay, abstract. Under consideration in this paper are two seminal statements and their concomitants, currently unknown, as follows. 1, there is an unidentified phenomenon interacting with the current human population on Earth. 2, it is currently unknown whether the phenomenon is exclusively extraterrestrial, extradimensional, cryptoterrestrial, demonic/jinn, proto/ancient human, time travelers, etc., or some combination or mutation of any or all of these. However, it appears highly likely that the phenomenon per se is not constituted exclusively of members of the current human population. In this paper, we address the above under the overarching theme, Ultraterrestrials, in order to develop a template to be matched against data at hand and that may be procured in the future. Keywords. I probably don't need to read the keywords, but still, it's fun. Extraterrestrials, ultraterrestrials, time travelers, forensics, disclosure. So, from the outset, I'm going to say that I'm sort of torn on what I think is going on with this paper in general. I said a moment ago that I thought it was curious because Hal's a hard scientist, right? He's an academic. He's published hard science papers. This is not that. This is like a philosophical exploration of how to frame the phenomena in general, right? What hypothesis or combination of hypotheses best frames what's going on with it. And the reason I say I'm torn is because part of me thinks that Hal already has some insight into that question. I think he may already have some insight into the identity of whatever this presence is. And this paper almost strikes me as him wanting to be not on the right side of history, that's the wrong phrasing, but kind of planting his flag in the ground and saying, I said ultraterrestrials. I said ultraterrestrials in 2022, just leaving that out there. Because I suspect that that will be the hypothesis that fits this phenomenon best. Anyway, though, continuing. Background. As one takes a decades-long view of the unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, UFO topic, it is easy to become frustrated by what one sees as a lack of robust progress in establishing sure and certain ironclad data points about even the most fundamental issues. These issues prompt such key questions as follows. Is the phenomena predominantly nuts and bolts, psychological, or metaphysical, assuming such distinctions can be made? Is the source of the phenomena predominantly terrestrial, ultraterrestrial, e.g. ancient occult group, isolated pre-diluvial high-tech society, stranded ETs/gods, or extraterrestrial, assuming that distinctions between these alternatives are meaningful? Has the phenomena ramped up in our era? Has it been essentially constant over millennia? Are oft-times related topics such as claimed abductions, crop circles, and animal mutilations truly related, or are they separate categories of phenomena? I mean, I certainly have all these questions. Juicy bait from the get-go, Dr. Puthoff. And there is one more bullet point on the next page here I did not read. Are institutions such as governments truly that much more knowledgeable than we are, if only in certain protected domains, or are they essentially in the same position as we are, give or take some hard data in hand? All right, 2, critique. As we critique our position vis-a-vis these issues, 3 factors stand out as weaknesses that potentially could be addressed by developing new strategies. They are, 1, gathering data is essentially passive. Typically, events are reported and data are gathered and analyzed. This constitutes essentially a reactive opposed to proactive mode. This is not meant as a pejorative statement. Astrophysicists find themselves in the same situation. Even seemingly proactive movements such as John Greenwald Jr.'s FOIA government document search in the public arena, 2, or attempted collection of the detritus of classified programs by some under special protected conditions, 3, simply constitute efforts to cause the government to release data to passive, ever-hopeful recipients. The ball is still in someone else's court. Other more proactive measurements could be taken, ranging from the relatively prosaic, e.g. setting up all-weather, all-sky optical IR monitoring stations, through the more tech-intensive approaches, e.g. magnetic disturbance and RF gigahertz detectors, multivariable monitoring suites, exoarchaeological investigations to the arcane, e.g. search of evidence for anomalous manipulation of human genetic structure, and stretching to the esoteric, e.g. remote viewing, telepathic contact. Again, I love the breadth of the questions he's asking, the angles he's approaching from. This is my shit. This is my approach to Dr. Puthoff, who is not watching. 2, by and large, our models' hypotheses are relatively circumscribed. As stated in entry 2 above, although interested parties tend to be proponents of what would be a wide range of hypotheses, ranging from it's all psychological, check your DSM-5, through interdimensional time travelers and angels to graze an advanced spacecraft from Zeta Reticuli. There are additional options, though, mentioned in passing in the literature that are not taken very seriously and therefore go relatively unsearched. These include such categories as a hidden community of ETs/gods, possibly stranded here millennia ago, a la Zachariah Sitchin's Earth Chronicles series. Yeah, that definitely is a hypothesis that is a fun one. But I'm not going to get distracted here yet. 4 isolated remnants of a pre-diluvial high-tech society, in parentheses the Atlantis myth, or an ancient occult group who happened to stumble on new energy sources and control of gravity. I'm actually going to get distracted here on the Atlantis myth, pre-diluvial high-tech society strain, because I was just talking to the great Randall Carlson about this hypothesis. The idea that there could be a sort of breakaway civilization group, a highly advanced human group with some kind of esoteric, high technological knowledge, probably some combination of those two things, particularly because humanity, it seems the evidence, the scientific evidence and the anthropological evidence is supporting that the human race is probably much older than we typically think. And just because we only have evidence of, organized societies seemingly only going back 5, 6, maybe 7,000 years, depending on how far back you're counting, what you're counting under that bracket, that column, maybe a few thousand years older than that, even if we start talking about Göbekli Tepe or something. But what if that is only scratching the surface? What if humanity is like 100,000, 200,000 years old, which again seems to be where the anthropological evidence is pointing? Who knows, man? Who knows how advanced we may have been, or some at least small group of us may have been in our distant past, and what if some of those people survived? I think this is a compelling question. So anyway, isolated remnants of a pre-diluvial high society, the Atlantis myth, or ancient occult group who happened to stumble upon new energy sources and control of gravity, and including a World War II covert cabal of the military-industrial complex variety. And here in parentheses, he puts our friend Richard Dolan's breakaway civilization concept. Continuing, we consider some of these options in more detail below. 3. Analysis/speculation, not forensics, constitutes the present core modus operandi. As the various hypotheses are generated and pursued, hypothesis generation, and data are gathered, considerable intellectual effort goes into attempting a fit between the two, hypothesis testing. This is certainly a healthy activity, deriving as it does from the instinctive and productive human urge to reduce ambiguity in interpreting one's surroundings. However, this approach could profit by incorporating elements of a more forensic gumshoe style, as in criminalistics and intelligence work. And the very fact that so many hypotheses remain on the table regarding the source of the phenomenon clearly indicates that forensic work to date has been inadequate to even eliminate certain options, hypotheses elimination. All 3 forms of hypothesis handling are required. 3. Strategy for forward motion. Given the tenor of the above remarks, the following recommendations are offered as a proactive measure to make headway. Specifically, it would behoove us to set aside our tentativeness about any given hypotheses, place it on the table as an almost certainly true, and go for it with an aggressive forensic mindset. Consider the following disparate hypothetical examples of the type outlined in Entry 2 of the abstract. And just to refresh our memories, Entry 2 in the abstract is 2. It is currently unknown whether the phenomenon is exclusively extraterrestrial, extradimensional, crypto-terrestrial, demonic, jinn, proto-ancient human, time travelers, etc., or some combination or mutation of any or all of these. However, it appears highly likely that the phenomenon per se is not constituted exclusively of members of the current human population. The word current there is interesting, isn't it? Members of the current human population. Why put that word in there? Back to this strategy for forward motion section, or whatever it's called, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, number 1. In this scenario, crash retrievals of nuts and bolts alien hardware have occurred, the detritus of which has been distributed in the US to corporate America, the Colonel Corso scenario. For anybody that doesn't know, Colonel Corso, he came forward essentially stating that the Roswell wreckage was indeed of extraterrestrial origin and that it was to some degree reverse engineered.
He drew me back in and put me in charge of that and established a foreign technology division for me. And these were the artifacts on a crashed flying saucer, which we used the word applied engineering. Was Dr. Teller was still alive, knows he helped him. And we fed these things. He gave me the job of finding industry or scientists that were close to these items and feed us to them in normal R&D projects.
And you're saying these items came from somewhere else?
They came from a flying saucer.
How do you know that?
Because they were marked in the files as coming from New Mexico.
Roswell?
Yeah, the Roswell.
If such is the case, certain telltale signatures should emerge under scrutiny. Moreover, some evidence indicates this could be the case. These would include a certain level of relatively low profile, possibly statesman-influenced integrated investment control of a sect of global multinational corporations with convergent interlocking technology developments, e.g. aerospace and electronics corporations. That was enough of a mouthful that for a moment, just a moment, I had flashbacks of meandering through the word salad of our beloved gateway process paper. But anyway, if biological specimens have been retrieved, the development of unusual lines of biological genetic inquiry by highly qualified professionals whose career path would seem to diverge suddenly from what might have been extrapolated from their earlier work, e.g. accelerated research into retroviruses. Sudden initiation in the late 1940s or early 50s without clear precedents, and in known UFO-related research institutes, e.g. Battelle. Again, I'll resist the urge to go down that rabbit hole. E.g. Battelle of concentrated development of new high-tech, high-temperature, low-density intermetallic alloys funded by nearby government facilities such as WPAFB, e.g. nitinol. So nitinol is this substance that, within UAP lore is supposedly reverse engineered from recovered UFO craft. And if you haven't heard of nitinol is this shape memory alloy, meaning it remembers its original shape and returns to it even if you bend it or damage it. And of course, this is eerily similar to what's reported in many UFO cases, including Roswell. But its connections to UFO lore are even weirder than that, because a researcher named Anthony Bragaglia actually was able to obtain documents from the DIA via the Freedom of Information Act, and they gave him like 150 pages of documents that seem to almost confirm that this could be an anomalous substance reverse engineered from recovered exotic materials. Anyway, the accelerated development of geopolitical alliances, space weaponry, etc., for reasons not wholly interpretable in terms of national interest agendas, e.g. SDI, U.S. Space Force, evidence for covert manipulation of the UFO ET theme in the public sector by governmental entities, e.g. the CIA's 1953 Robertson Panel. Evidence for generally sub-rosa, highly classified programs addressing the UAP issue, e.g. as in the recently revealed OSAP ATIP programs. Privatized access to space, e.g. by enterprises such as SpaceX, Bigelow Aerospace, Blue Origin, or threats to national international security, e.g. nation-state terrorism, might serve to stimulate the surfacing of certain technological developments, materials at an accelerated rate, and so on. All right, that sort of sums up the potential arguments in favor of the extraterrestrial argument. Now moving on to 2, the isolated humans hypothesis. All right, 2, the isolated humans hypothesis. An isolated, high-tech, closed community of humans with somewhat advanced scientific knowledge exists apart from the known culture. Telltale signatures might include continuing observation of technology only somewhat in advance of public knowledge, e.g. 1897 airships, unaccounted for missing financial assets, and industrial-grade resources, possibly including individuals, apparent covert misdirection of society in the absence of real evidence to accept the likelihood of ET presence, the relative lack of evidence of extremely advanced sophistication of hardware, i.e. hardware clearly capable of present-day design and manufacture, even conceptually. That was a hell of a sentence. I think I follow, though, and I do agree that those could all be telltale signatures of this isolated humans hypothesis. 3, the stranded or colonizing ET/gods hypothesis. How can you not love this one? Telltale signatures might include evidence in myth for high-tech interpretation of claimed devices beyond human capability of the era to manufacture, e.g. nuclear-powered LG production manna machine in biblical times. Hard evidence for isolated mountain bases detectable by satellite signatures of fast walker or UCT uncorrelated target flight paths or anomalous undersea activity or bases detectable by distributed underwater monitoring systems. Covert elite group exercising occult religious influence in society, evidence for buried high-tech artifacts or locales with unusual signal/radiation characteristics here or off planet. Interesting collection of potential arguments for this stranded or colonizing ET/gods hypothesis. What I'm noticing is a lot of these arguments are not mutually exclusive, right? Like, you could argue that some of these examples could also support the idea of the sort of breakaway, isolated, advanced ancient human group argument, right? Like, for instance, isolated mountain bases, mythological tales from antiquity. Those could also be arguments for an anciently, pre-Diluvian, advanced, hyper-advanced group of humans. And I think that's true of a lot of these. I think you could mix and match some of these. 4, the interdimensional or time travelers hypothesis, gaining access to our space-time continuum. Telltale signs might take the form of Fortean phenomena, of instant appearance/disappearance of beings in a reverse process. Humans experience portal access to alternate realities, appearance of beings out of sync in dress, in mannerism, or language, or technology, similarly undecipherable. Man, he sort of just like abandoned punctuation at this point in the paper. It makes it a little bit clunky to read. I guess this is all one sentence. I'm just going to start it over. 4, the interdimensional or time travelers hypothesis, gaining access to our space-time continuum. Telltale signs might take the form of Fortean phenomena, of instant appearance/disappearance of beings. In a reverse process, human experience portal access to alternate realities, appearance of beings out of sync in dress, mannerism, or language, or technology similarly undecipherable, financial transaction, timeline, or other futures-oriented activity indicative of advanced foreknowledge, evidence for teleportation of individuals or material over geophysical distances, appearance of humanoids in conformance with predicted genetic evolution of modern-day Homo sapiens, etc. You gotta love your out-of-place time traveler or interdimensional traveler who's like wearing the wrong outfit for the times or speaking the wrong language or seems to be totally out of touch with societal norms and cultural mores. There are some fun stories like that. There's one story I think Richard Dolan told my friend Chris Ramsey in his documentary that he recorded at Contact in the Desert. There's also a story from Richard Dolan's book about and again, this is one of those examples that could point to multiple hypotheses, but it's essentially this Renaissance era intellectual is visited by, I think, 3 different human seeming beings, but they're dressed differently. They are hyper advanced. They're hyper intelligent. And the impression they made is that these beings were not normal, that maybe they were not human, although they appeared to be. Maybe they were from the future. I'm going to find the details to this and flash it up on the screen at least. Okay, I had to insert this in after the fact because it's just too good. It's a story from Fazio Cardano. He was this Renaissance-era physician and esotericist, and this is the exact thing that is riffed on in Dolan's book, Alien Agendas. August 13th, 1491. When I had completed the customary rites at about the 20th hour of the day, 7 men duly appeared to me, clothed in silken garments resembling Greek togas, and wearing, as it were, shining shoes. The undergarments beneath their glistening and ruddy breastplates seemed to be wrought of crimson, the Latin says purple, and were of extraordinary glory and beauty. Nevertheless, all were not dressed in this fashion, but only 2 who seemed to be of a nobler rank than the others. The taller of them, who was of ruddy complexion, was attended by 2 companions, and the second, who was fairer and of shorter stature, by 3. Thus, in all, there were 7. They were about 40 years of age, but they did not appear to be above 30. When asked who they were, they said that they were men composed, as it were, of air, and subject to birth and death. It was true their lives were much longer than ours, and might even reach 300 years duration. The shorter of the 2 leaders had 300 disciples in a public academy, and the other 200. Indeed, both were in the habit of lecturing publicly. Such a fantastic wonder nugget, right? And again, I'm going to have to resist the urge to muse about this further, because I could probably make a whole video on just this topic. Obviously, in the above examples, we have a helter-skelter montage of elements from much of the UFO mythology of claimed UFO experience. Where I consider we need to go with this is to shift away from a strategy that relies solely on further content analysis, toward what the intelligence world calls traffic analysis, that is to first order independent of content. That is, we got double that is. That is, while not eschewing the present strategies in place, we incorporate into our studies in as aggressive and proactive a way as we can muster. More forensic work to expand our playing field and extract from the data and its surrounds more of the patterns and networks that appear to yoke the data together, rather than just attending to the data itself, since this takes such hard work and such a commitment of effort in new areas of investigation. It probably also means, as suggested above, being willing to press a given hypothesis to its limit, even though it may be the wrong one, so that our understanding of the range of possibilities to which we must keep our minds open does not act to disperse our focused activity. For Ultraterrestrials, one of my favorites, at least in the typical sort of Keel permutation. As a focused example of broadening the scope of our investigation, let us consider the ultraterrestrial hypothesis as defined above, e.g. ancient occult group, isolated pre-diluvial high-tech society, stranded ET gods, i.e. sequestered terrestrial cultures, examples 2 and 3 above, existing alongside us in distinct stealth. First, what are possible signatures of an ultraterrestrial as opposed to an extraterrestrial presence? Bullet point 1, density of sightings over decades, if not centuries, potentially indicative of a present time local as opposed to an extraterrestrial source. In other words, that the UAP phenomena is so ubiquitous as to argue against the simple model of an occasionally visiting extraterrestrial explorer. Next bullet point, recent since World War II claimed focused messaging regarding elimination of nuclear technologies and concern regarding environmental degradation are would-be reasonable themes for a co-located but isolated terrestrially located society. Next bullet point, via subterfuge and disinformation, stealthily injected proliferating emphasis on the ET theme as misdirection to prevent exposure of local terrestrial habitation, as in a theater a la Vallee's Messengers of Deception. Next bullet point, interactions with humanoid genotype ranging from modern human creatures, including sightings of little people over the centuries, encounters with non-humans that haunt our folklore, let alone genetically engineered biological robots or drones, all variants within the lexicon of the alternative forms of the human genome. That's a little more in line with what Keel meant, I think, by ultra-terrestrial. It seems like he's sort of, I mean, far be it for me to correct Hal Puthoff on anything, but it seems like he's conflating the extraterrestrial, or I'm sorry, the ultra-terrestrial model with like breakaway civilizations and stuff in some of those previous points. But for Keel, ultra-terrestrials are more like these beings that seem to exist beyond the reach of our currently measured electromagnetic sensible fields, right? That these are beings that may at times instantiate themselves in physical form or forms that we can witness with our eyes, like the Mothman, like other cryptids, like UFOs, but they're fundamentally not physical creatures. At least this is what you'll find in books like The Eighth Tower, Mothman Prophecies, and Operation Trojan Horse. Okay, continuing. Seeming emphasis on reproduction, e.g. harvesting of sperm and ova from certain genetic lines, let alone hybridization, could bespeak outreach toward genetic diversity for a relatively inbred, local, isolated society on the wane and suffering from potentially debilitating genetic syndrome. Yeah, I guess the idea of if you're isolated and inbred, you may need to do like UFO-style abductions and have reproduction schemes or something. Continuing, observation of vehicles not that advanced, i.e. comprehensible as opposed to magical, even if nonetheless well in advance of our own. Next bullet point, the use of telepathic information transfer only marginally ahead of present-day technical neurobiological advances in the public domain. Continuing, reports of cave-like or undersea destinations during claimed abductions. And then final bullet point, given the need for secrecy concerning the reality of all of the above on the part of ultraterrestrials as co-located denizens of our planet, while nonetheless being subject to a certain level of codependence, the inscrutable nature of the interactions would not be an unexpected outcome. And I guess we're still under ultraterrestrial hypothesis here. Second, under the assumption of compelling evidence for the above, it would be critical to discern the motivations of the ultraterrestrials to maintain such a secret existence. Of possible utmost concern to them would be an overarching fear of exploitation, even annihilation due to vulnerabilities, despite processing certain levels of technological superiority, or fear of assimilation and consequent loss of culture, religion, customs, uncontrolled genetic mingling, i.e. culture shock, fear of human diseases, concern for consequences to the terrestrial human population, with its attendant reciprocal effects on their own culture, potential disruption of resource gathering, including benefits derived from stealthy interactions with and possibly manipulating certain aspects of the human terrestrial society. Third, what might be the consequences for humanity of disclosure of an ultraterrestrial group as compared with that of an extraterrestrial visitation? Clearly the devil is in the details, but one could speculate that the former might in fact be more dire than the latter, considering that they had been here amongst us, perhaps in very personal ways. In contrast, ET visitation, in all probability being more foreign and inscrutable, could be safer. See, I don't know. I don't. Why would it be harder for us? Why would it cause more ontological shock to confront the idea that there's an advanced group? So again, we have to distinguish here, because this feels different to me than what John Keel was calling ultraterrestrials. But essentially, again, this sounds like some kind of super advanced cohabitating physical race here on Earth that Puthoff is talking about. Why would that be more of an ontological shock than literal ETs? I don't know. I guess it would, again, the devil would be in the details, to use his words, because what if they have some incredible control over reality that we don't have? What if they know things about reality that we don't know? Those things could lead to some pretty significant ontological shock. Such topics constitute interesting material for sociological research. For more detailed discussion of what I have called here the ultraterrestrial hypothesis, I recommend The Cryptoterrestrials by Mac Tonnies. I'm not sure how you say that. But yeah, I mean, I guess here he's sort of showing that what he calls ultraterrestrials is maybe better classified as cryptoterrestrials. Anyway, are there any hints in the UAP literature that there is evidence that the ultraterrestrial scenario outlined above may have some validity? Author Nick Redfern, in his book The NASA Conspiracies, asserts that there is. His interview of an ex-NASA Gemini contractor led to the claim that there was evidence of a small band of individuals who were not aliens from some distant star system at all, but supposedly represented the last vestige of a very ancient terrestrial race of beings that thousands of years ago had an advanced and isolated civilization that was responsible for the legends of Atlantis and similar stories. So again, we're talking breakaway civilization. So again, had an advanced and isolated civilization that was responsible for the legends of Atlantis and similar stories, but who were forced by circumstances to retreat into remote sequestered locales for survival, e.g. mountains and the seabed. At present, they were primarily concerned about nuclear war and degradation of the environment, and this has led to some degree of attempting to influence our culture. However, they felt that it had to be carried out under the ruse that they were from different star systems to protect what they felt to be their vulnerable position despite their advanced technology. Yeah, that is an interesting point there. That just because they're more advanced doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't be vulnerable to us, right? Like, if there's 7+ billion of us, and there's maybe, let's just say, a few thousand, few hundred of them, who knows? Maybe they still would be massively vulnerable to humans. 5. Correlation with ET hypothesis. Although the ultraterrestrial hypothesis scenario considered here considers an expansion of the model to include other than the simple extraterrestrial hypothesis, the predicted observable consequences of the two options are quite parallel. For our purposes here, careful consideration of data obtained along the way are to be matched against templates for the two major options, ultraterrestrial and extraterrestrial, keeping in mind that it might be a both and rather than an either or. And now we're on to references, so I believe that is that. And I really do agree with that final point, that it may be a both and rather than an either or. And within that both and, I think we need to include a somewhat more exotic possibility, and that's something more like Keel's hypothesis, Keel's ultraterrestrial hypothesis, this notion that there are intelligences, that there are beings beyond the scope of our current scientific instrumentation, that may be beings that are, of a different substance or are based in consciousness. And I think he sort of brushed up against these ideas in some of the hypotheses that Puthoff laid out here, but I personally think that that deserves a share of the possibilities, perhaps a large share of them. Because if these are beings that exist in a non-physical form primarily, and they have the ability to instantiate when they need to in physical form or send drones in physical form as their representative, I think that could explain a lot. So I have so many thoughts in closing, but before I get to those, I do want to give a bit of a nod to the great John Keel, because it's a little odd to me that he doesn't really get a nod in this paper, since he's the father of this ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, really. And I think the end of his book, Operation Trojan Horse, does a pretty good job of summarizing exactly what he considers these ultra-terrestrials to be. So I'm going to read just the first page or two of that chapter for you, and if you find this fascinating, maybe I'll do a full read-through of the chapter. All right, this is from Chapter 15 of Operation Trojan Horse, You Can't Tell the Players Without a Scorecard. Now perhaps we can better understand RAF Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard's remarks. The astral world of illusion, which is greatly inhabited by illusion-prone spirits, is well known for its multifarious imaginative activities and exhortations. Seemingly, some of its denizens are eager to exemplify principalities and powers. Others pronounce upon morality, spirituality, deity, etc. All of these astral exponents who invoke human consciousness may be sincere, but many of their theses may be framed to propagate some special phantasm, or simply to astonish and disturb the gullible just for the devil of it. These illusion-prone spirits are responsible for nearly all of the UFO appearances and manipulations. The flying saucers do not come from some Buck Rogers type civilization on some distant planet. They are our next door neighbors, part of another space-time continuum where life, matter, and energy are radically different than ours. Ancient man knew this and recognized it. The original biblical text employed the word Sheol, which meant the invisible world. Somehow, the translators turned this word into hell and gave it an entirely different meaning. After spending more than a decade investigating and researching UFO phenomenon, an engineer named Bryant Reeve published this statement in 1965. We began to see that vehicles in outer space were not really the important thing. They were merely an indication of something vastly greater, of Earthman's awakening to a tremendous new awareness. And then from there, the chapter kind of continues into talking about Project Blue Book, and I think that's interesting to mention as well, because Project Blue Book, as many of you may know, started as sort of a effort to debunk UFO phenomena, right? But J. Allen Hynek, who was at the very tip of the spear of this project, actually began to believe something very similar to Keel, that this was more of a non-physical phenomenon, that this could be even considered kind of a more spiritual phenomenon. He even became interested in Rosicrucianism. So that's a whole different story. I did do a podcast with his son, Paul Hynek, and we do riff about that to some degree if you're interested. All right, a few more things I really need to say about this paper. One of the most telling things about this paper, I think, is one of the most basic. It's the title. Why did Dr. Puthoff choose to call this paper Ultraterrestrial Models? That choice alone is telling. It suggests that Hal, with his intelligence background, with his collective knowledge, is saying the quiet part out loud, at least as much as he can without breaking NDAs, that is probably the hypothesis he gravitates toward, given the preponderance of evidence that he has. I also think there's a number of other really fascinating specific breadcrumbs in this paper, like that book by Nick Redfern, The NASA Conspiracy, I think it's called. I haven't read it, but it's the one that he says, the one that claims NASA has worked with some advanced, technologically superior, ancient breakaway civilization that's still hiding out on Earth in small numbers. It may sound like a hypothesis that's no more likely than the other major ones that he outlines in this paper, but let's think about it for a second, because it does explain a lot. It explains, for one, why they're so advanced but not quite godlike, why they care about the environment and nuclear weapons. If they live here, it impacts them just as much as it impacts us. And finally, it explains one of the most common cliche questions, right? Why don't they land on the White House lawn? Because they don't want to. They want to keep themselves concealed. And personally, I think the best explanation collectively of all of this phenomena is sort of a synthesis between this idea, the ancient advanced breakaway civilization, kind of, in air quotes, ultra-terrestrial that Puthoff talks about, and the kind of ultra-terrestrial that Keel talks about, that's really existing in a different frame or dimension of reality that's like our interdimensional next door neighbor. And I have no problem putting a sort of spiritual spin on this, particularly a more esoteric kind of spiritual spin on it. As many of you know, I'm fond of this idea, or I gravitate toward this idea, that there are non-physical beings. There are beings that exist in a sort of realm of consciousness, or what the ancient Platonists or Hermeticists would have called nous, mind, right? The realm of mind. And maybe, at least I think this is a logical postulation, wouldn't it make sense that some ancient, technologically advanced esoteric group understands and navigates those dimensions of consciousness with a kind of literacy that we've lost in the modern context? I think so. But no matter what we're dealing with, if we're dealing with ultra-terrestrials, beings in some other dimension adjacent to ours, actual extraterrestrials from another planet, time travelers, a breakaway civilization, the takeaway is clear. The phenomenon is both far stranger, yet also more intimately connected to us than we've been led to believe. And as ambiguous as it still is, papers like this, especially when they come from insiders like Dr. Hal Puthoff, they might be the best breadcrumb trail, the closest thing to a whisper from behind the curtain that we ever get, at least for now. But let us dialogue about it further in the comments, my friends, and if you would be so kind, do tickle that algorithm for me. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Much love to all of you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next transmission.